I'm going to show you some steps on how to make a fabric basket, like a little storage basket or something. What you want to do, you want to start out with fabrics. I've picked two fabrics out here. I've got one batik and this fabric. And you want to cut squares. So I want to cut 2 squares of my fabric, and I'm going to cut the selvages off, and I'm going to cut both of them at the same time. And that's one way to know that they're exactly identical in size. It just makes things a little bit easier. So for my example today, I'm making my squares 12.5 inches, which coincidentally is the exact same size as my ruler. I've already pre-cut a 12.5 inch strip here. And then see if I can line my fabrics back up. Like so. And you can make these in lots of different sizes. You can experiment a little bit with what size square you want to start with. And when we get to a later step, you can experiment a little bit with how tall you want the sides to be, or how short you want the sides to be too. Okay, so I've got that pretty close to lined up. So I'm just going to cut, and obviously I could make several of them from my leftovers. Get rid of those for now. Then what we're going to do is we're going to layer these together, and I'm going to have right sides facing together. Layer my 2 fabrics. And then I'm going to put a piece of batting. I've already cut a piece of batting the same size as both of my fabrics, and put that on top. Now I prefer to stitch on the fabrics, so when I take this over to the machine, I will sew. On this I'll probably sew, I might be able to get away with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Otherwise I'd do closer to a 1/2 inch or whatever works. It's not exact, doesn't have to be exact. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stitching on the middle of one side, close to the middle, stitch around, go down the sides, down these sides, and then come back and leave myself an opening that's big enough for me to turn the whole thing inside out. So I'll take this over to the machine and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. So you can maybe see that I started stitching and I tacked a few stitches here, went all the way around, and came back and stopped here and tacked that a little bit so that it won't be loose, because as I turn this inside out, it will pull on those stitches, so we don't want those coming out. What I need to do now is come in and trim the batting as close to the seam as I can, obviously without cutting the stitches so I don't have a hole, but this will reduce the bulk in the seam when I turn it, so that I don't have a big huge bulky seam that I'm trying to press out. Sometimes it can be a little challenging. So I'm going to spare you the rest of the batting cutting. I'll just go like that. And I also want to trim my corners close again, but not into the stitches. so that my corner will be a little bit sharper and less bulky. So I'm going to finish that and be back again. I have got my batting all trimmed close to my seam and my corners trimmed down. So now I'm going to turn the whole thing inside out. So that we've got the right sides out, just like so. I barely left myself enough room, but I left myself just enough room. Then I'm going to push my corners out, get everything laying nice and flat, and we'll go from there. So, and if you trim too close to the edges on your corners, you'll end up pushing right through the corners. So you want to get close, but not too close when you trim your corners. And we'll get that one, and there's one more. Then after I have my corners pushed out and gone back, I can either finger press these or I can take the iron and press everything flat. And then what I like is to top stitch around the edge about 1/4 inch from the edge or so, and if I'm really careful, I can just stitch right across the opening and you'll never even know that that's where it was open, because I'm not big on hand stitching. So do that, and then you will want to quilt the top. And you can do whatever you want for quilting. It's not going to matter. With such a nice small piece, I've been using these as my opportunity to practice my free motion quilting. And it's a little scary. It's a lot scary yet. Anyway, I've got one here that's already quilted, so I can show you. So you can see I did something with it at least. Then what you're going to do is fold it in half and decide, get my other ruler here, decide how long you want the sides to be. And you're going to draw at a 45-degree angle. And I think, let's see, I started at 12.5. I think I'm gonna do a 3-inch side. So I'm gonna take my pen, I'm using a friction pen, and mark one end to the other across there. Probably would have been a good idea for me to use a different color. And this is going to be the inside of the basket. Get my 45-degree angle going here again. And 3 inches. And you can either sew these first, and you want to make sure that you're going to reinforce the first part and the end part when you sew that stitch. And you can do this first, or you can mark them all first and then go to the sewing machine, because you're going to want to do that for all 4 corners. So I'll finish this up and I'll stitch those and bring it back and show you. And now we've got all the corners done, and it's a little bit, I mean, once you get the first side done, then you kind of have to lay it a little bit like funny like that in order to stitch the next sides. And then you end up with something that looks a little like this. And I'm going to just turn this like that. And then you can do kind of whatever you want with these little tabs. Either hot glue them or stitch them down or whatever. And the same with these little flaps, but they're kind of cute. I've been hot gluing mine, but you could certainly stitch through there, hand stitch or machine or whatever. And one of the ideas I saw was to stick a little button right there in the corner, but they're kind of cute. I also got the one that I started finished now, and you probably can't see the quilting or anything, but I tacked down the tabs, and this one I made just a little bit shorter on the sides than the first one, so it sits a little lower and wider. But it's a great project to use fat quarters or 10-inch squares or whatever you've got available. So hope you enjoy.